very special chair.
I'm so high up.
And good morning, our guests, honored guests who are going to have this very interesting talk session. And Dan, please, can you introduce these?
Of course. Welcome everybody this morning to our show studio in conversation panel called Dream Worlds. My name's Dan Thorley, and I'd like to introduce all of my panelists this morning. I have my co-chairwoman, Lou Stoppard, the editor of Show Studio, with me today. We have Thomas Tate, designer from London. We have Lucy Moore, who is the director of Claire de Rouen Bookstore, also in London. Lotte Volkova-Adam, who is a stylist based in Paris. And Paul Haveline, who is a model, DJ, and budding publisher, also based in Paris. So this morning we will be talking to you about all of our various careers and what we are up to in the world of creating stories around fashion today, and the narrative that is so important to build in creating the wider universe of a fashion designer, which goes above and beyond what they're doing in creating garments, because we've chosen a group that are in front of you today who are people that are much more interested in going past the fabric and the textile and creating something that has a deeper meaning, that speaks to different subcultures, that speaks to people on a more artistic level than just the commerce of clothing. And I think that's very important for young designers who are starting out today, students like some of you in front of us, and also the various international press who are looking for something more in fashion than just seeing something that's going to be in stores and on racks and selling clothes in department stores. So we're going to start today with Thomas's work, because I'm very, very excited to have him with us today. Thomas is somebody who a few of us in the audience here today have watched grow immensely in the last years, from his very early starts at Central St. Martin's. He was one of the youngest designer to graduate from the MA course ever in its history under Louise. And Thomas has done some very exciting things in the last years, notably winning the very first LVMH prize in 2014, which was quite a coup for his career. And last year we also saw him as the guest designer at Pitti Immagine in Florence, where he created a really fantastic exhibition space. So we're going to look at the next slide if possible. I've got no remote today, so we're doing things a little bit more manually. What we're looking at right now is what Thomas was working on last June, and if I could ask you a little bit about where you started with this presentation, which was in the Boboli Gardens, in the orangery, the lemon house of the gardens.
Yeah,
Is there someone here?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, Pitti was quite a long process. They had approached me a couple of years prior to do the exhibition, and I don't know, we weren't ready at the time, and then they kind of got back in touch. Actually, putting it together was about a year of planning, and it was a lot to do. I had a friend who I had studied with that we keep in touch, and her name is Trine. And I remember we had this really interesting conversation about creative communication, and there was this sort of big concern for her about I mean, it's something that you see a little bit more obviously when you're working in a company or within a group that has a design team, where in situations like mine, where I don't really work immediately with other creative people, you realize that you have a little bit of a bubble that you live in, and you don't necessarily need to explain so much. And I did, the kind of creative communication sort of became a bit of a theme that I was interested in and that I wanted to develop, and I wanted to do something with Pitti that offered people and myself a chance to have face-to-face conversations and have a setting that is very much so inviting, rather than fashion show, which I find sometimes can be a bit isolating, both for the viewer and for myself.
Absolutely, and Pitti, for those of you who aren't aware, Pitti Immagine is a very large trade show based in Florence, and it's principally a menswear trade show which invites many manufacturers and very large companies to show their wares in January and June, and it's very principally focused on Italian tailoring, on denim, on much more commercial wares. But what the most exciting thing that they do is actually invite a men's designer and a women's designer from the, let's say, upper echelons of much more avant-garde fashion realm to show a special collection or to create an exhibition, basically to take them out of their normal context, whether they be usually showing in London or in Paris, and to use the amazing spaces in Florence to create a special experience. And so what Thomas did was to take over the Lemon House in the Boboli Gardens and to create a very large, beautiful mirrored set, which you see partly in front of you. Could we see the next slide, please? And within that, to create these different dialogues between not only his own work, but also the work of other creative people and their opinions as well. So what you first saw there was one of Thomas's jackets, which was reimagined from his archives with new Italian manufacturers that he was given access to with this Pitti project. So it was basically an evolution and elevation of his work as well.
Yeah, and there was a bit of it was kind of like a redo opportunity with basically everything that you saw clothing-wise. So the idea was to take certain things, each of them had a different meaning, where it might have been a product that I kind of do again and again, and it takes a different form every time I do it, but you realize that the ambitions with each of the products is fundamentally the same. So you're always trying to achieve the same thing with one product, or it would have been something that kind of got to a certain extent by Fashion Week and I wasn't necessarily happy with it, or I felt like it could have had a little bit more time to sort of bake. So it was nice in a way because we were preparing Pitti for so long that we got to have the luxury of time and also some advanced facilities, especially in Italy, to give them an existing product and say, right, this is what's wrong with it, or this is where it could have gone. It was a problem-solving thing. It was nice to give certain things that I'm attached to a second life, and I think that's what it offered me. And then the conversational element of it was to invite certain women who surround me or who have influenced me or encouraged my work for a while. So Manouche was one of them. Manouche is an architect who's a friend of mine in London, and she participated not only in a sort of video conversation with myself, but also designed the mirrored spaces that we show the clothing in. So it was very much so about showing the original product and the developed version of it in a setting where people could go and touch things and get really, really close, and then everything was sort of set within mirrored boxes that allowed the product to reflect to continue.
Yeah, it was an interesting sort of intimacy, but at the same time, it was
a nice feeling because it was, you went into these little sort of hubs, these little boxes, but actually it was kind of an infinite space.
Next slide, please. And this is one of your conversations, isn't it, with
Yeah, so that one was with Kathy, so I went to New York and sat down with Kathy Horn, who's a critic, and who's been a very big supporter of mine from pretty much the beginning. So it was really interesting. I always really like having a conversation with her. She's always extremely insightful. But yeah, it was nice. Each of the conversations that I had kind of took, I had one with my stylist, Beth, and one with Kathy, one with Manouche. I sort of launched the conversations in a similar way with each one, but they naturally just kind of took their own course. Kathy was particularly interesting. There was only meant to be about 5 minutes, and Kathy and I ended up taping for about 2 hours. But yeah, it was interesting to see how starting a conversation on the same note kind of took a very dramatic twist with each person.
Thank you, Thomas. I think using this project as a starting point for today is quite exciting and a good launch pad for what we want to talk about, because working with a designer like Thomas is, I think, very interesting for this topic, because he's somebody, in my opinion, that is actually working between the two, sort of, it's almost paradoxically so obsessed with product and the design process itself, whilst also selling and creating something that is so also aesthetically strange and particularly telling its own story as well. And I think that that also links into the work that Lotta does as well, and this idea that we'll get to later with somewhat of a backlash in the industry at the moment, where we're actually in a crisis and we are looking to things that both are desirable, but are also desirable in an aspirational way, but are also pragmatic and practical and important to actual physical use and the luxury of actually using something and having integrating it into part of your life. And I think that this project had that very that real life aspect to it, that Thomas was able to achieve something that he'd not done before, wasn't able to achieve, and he was able to revisit his own work in such a new way and show it to people in that way.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see people interacting with the clothes. I think that's something I took a lot from the experience of actually seeing how certain people might know exactly what's going on, and some people are completely confused as to how a product came about or how it was done. So I found it interesting because it was a great insight for me as well to understand from most of the guests that Pitti are media guests. So it's exciting for me to see how many of these people actually are mentally involved in the clothing and what happens.
Absolutely. Well, I think that there's quite often a huge disconnect between the people that watch what happens in fashion and the actual process of a designer and how they get to what is in front of them.
Do you think people got to appreciate the clothes more because they could talk to you about them and less about them, or do you think that there's always that expectation of a runway?
I think with Pitti it was a lot more obvious because you had the original product and you had the new and improved version.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so confusing in that sense, where it really was quite thematic in a way. I think that kind of catapulted a little bit some changes that I've done and that I'm continuing to work on for the brand, especially in the coming year. But last season, for example, I didn't show at London Fashion Week, which is what I've been doing since the beginning, and took the collection to Paris and wanted to do something. I personally wanted to do something that was a little bit physically easier to do, and I also really wanted to recapture a little bit of that kind of interactive element that I got a taste of at Pitti. So I did a small exhibition last season at Galerie Minaj in Paris, and it was great. And I think that's when I really noticed it, because it wasn't so much that this is the original product and this is the improved one like we did at Pitti. It was the whole collection. And it was hanging on regular hangers. There was a simplicity to that, and everybody was able to get right into the clothes and look at everything and touch things and take them off hangers and even try things on. Similar to a shop setting, I guess, which was lovely because a lot of people did really say quite clearly we wouldn't have absorbed any of this at the show. And it starts to make you think about all of the seasons you've done and how many things might have just got lost in translation.
Mm-hmm.
And the parallel to that, in creating these images that we're having a look at now with the photographer Charlie Youngman, and that was as well part of twisting and going back in a way to
yeah,
the
I didn't. The thing is, when you're working on the clothes, I don't do a pre-collection or anything like that, so I tend to work on the clothes for about 6 months at a time, and some elements are reoccurring from previous seasons, but it becomes a little bit too clear for me, where I've been looking and staring at something inside of it every day for so long that by the time it came time to do a shoot, I didn't necessarily want to see the clothes in this kind of head-to-toe form. I was a bit tired of that, and I definitely wanted to play around with the shape and see how we can distort things a little bit. Obviously, it being sort of the leading visual for the general public, we couldn't go as far as I wanted to, because you would have lost the clothes completely. So there was a little bit of pressure from Vogue and so on too.
As it was, how was the reaction to showing them in different restored positions and that sort of thing?
It was great. I think I took a lot from working with the girls as well. It was just nice to have a day on the shoot where you have to sort of sit everybody down and try and get them to do something that they're kind of programmed to look pretty. It's quite nice psychologically to kind of say, okay, well, forget about looking pretty for a while.
I'd like to open up to everyone right now just to ask about this phenomenon of the lookbook and its general shifting in towards editorial territory, and that idea that the front and back lookbook is not so much disappeared, but that the rise of cruise collections and pre-fall collections has actually pushed designers to go into a much more creative territory with that. What do we think? Do you think that has been a positive change in the last years, or are people? Is that a good boundary that's blurred? What do we think?
I mean, people have definitely been trying to do lookbooks in so many different ways, and sometimes it's true you do lose the quotes, and for me that's somehow a wing of a lookbook. So in a sense, I'm much more practical this way, and I don't care what's happening in the back, but I am interested in seeing what the clothes are like, what the look looks like on style or whatever, on Vogue.com. For me, the stylist is a tool of communication. It's a tool of my work. Actually, it's the immediate result. It's an immediate way of understanding whether that's going to work for me or not. So I'm actually more practical with things like this. So I think it's important to see.
Of course, because you need to use those for a shoot.
I feel sometimes it goes slightly ridiculous. It's not like a campaign. It's not supposed to represent your vision. It's not supposed, ultimately, it's not supposed to be this crazy creative piece of art. Like for me, I look at it really as a tool of my work. I have to see, I have to know what's going on and what I'm interested in using this clothes for my shoots or not. So I'm extremely practical this way.
I think it's interesting too, because when you think about the people that style the shows and the fact that for so many stylists who are working in the context of a magazine, they don't even have the flexibility to use those clothes in an interesting way because they're told by the brands that they have to shoot full look. So I think that is an interesting thing with the lookbooks, and maybe explains why people are trying to be more creative with how they present their clothes, sort of both on the runway but also in the kind of package around the runway, because actually that look that you see, it's not there for just one precious moment. That's also going to be replicated across countless editorials, probably with the same shoes and the same accessories. And it's interesting, the number of brands or designers who are trying to do something kind of quite precious as their lookbook, and almost going back to that old lookbook days. When people say kind of amazing lookbooks, people talk about like the Nick Knight Yoji ones, but then if you look at what J.B. Anderson is doing with kind of Jamie and Benjamin Bruno, Jamie Hawksworth and Benjamin Bruno, the lookbooks that they're doing, and even things like Gucci doing that in publication, is this idea of kind of brands themselves making perhaps more creative content than magazines are, which I think is quite strange and quite interesting. But I think it's definitely happening where you're seeing brands themselves trying to work on these kind of artistic, creative projects, whether it's an exhibition or a little book or Instagram series or what have you. They're trying to produce as much interesting content as an independent publication, but yet exercising so much control over an independent publication.
I mean, marketing has so much control in every brand, whether it's an app designer or it's a big house, So in a sense, honestly, when it comes down to shooting lookbooks or doing shows, there is a certain amount of rules, and there is a certain amount of this bag has to be featured. It's actually very down to earth, much more down to earth than we all, like to think about it or fantasize or glamorize it all. It's actually,
absolutely, and unfortunately as well, even the premise behind a lot of those projects you're talking about, like the Loewe lookbooks of J.W. Anderson, they are essentially, as you said, it's not that much more creative, but it's the way that they package it in an expensively bound book, which has only 1,200 copies, that is only distributed to certain people, and it gives it this scarcity that suddenly people wanted for that, whereas a magazine is still available for 10 euros, for 12 euros, and there's a certain equality and something a bit more accessible about a magazine's possibility of being found in all different cities for anybody in the audience to buy, whereas those projects, as a luxury brand always wants to do, continues to retain that air of exclusivity, which is also, which in its very nature does exclude people. And of course there are certain amounts of things that are now diffused everywhere on social media, but
that
at the
sense
same time...
of rarity, I think magazines are trying to sort of incorporate as well. Like we were just chatting this morning about like sort of exclusive covers and limited edition covers, you know, like 50 copies with this cover, like hurry up and get it. Like that is definitely that notion of rarity and collectability as well. It's not this kind of like democratic
But that's also slightly out of control, you know, the more covers you have, the less value each one of them has.
Yeah, I even thought it was interesting that Paul was on the cover of Dazed recently, and the image was actually
it's so embarrassing.
It's interesting because it wasn't even an image that was produced especially for the magazine. It was actually like a backstage project that Willy van der Peer had done at Prada, and it was essentially an image that was done at the show.
And they were fighting for the exclusivity of having Paul on the cover.
There you go, and it's just interesting to see how like that sort of cover reign has just become kind of out of control. Before we move off the lookbooks and things and move on to some talking about some shows, I wanted to ask Lucy just to wrap that up and in the realm of publishing and bookstores, how are those old lookbooks and things? Is there a market for these projects and even the new ones that are being produced? Like how does that fit into publishing in your stores when there's also so many actual fashion books that are produced and photography books? Where do you feel that those sit in terms of people valuing, for example, Nick's lookbooks, or I don't know, perhaps old Dries lookbooks from the 90s, things like that?
There's definitely a value, but just quickly I wanted to say about magazines and multiple covers, etc. I think there is, of course, a cynical aspect to it, but I feel as a kind of lover of printed matter, I have to also stand up for the magazines that are still, I believe, truly innovative and special. And okay, you do get, there are instances where I see, you know, one magazine, like one issue has 10 covers in there, none of them are very good, and it's just boring. It's boring for me because often someone comes in to buy something and they want the Jürgen cover and I don't have it, I just have the Harley Weir cover or whatever, and it's like, buy that one, you know. But I think that there are something I'm really interested in, and this relates to the question of lookbooks too, is the specificity of particular platforms. And I think now we're operating increasingly in a time when there are many, many different types of platform on which to present visual material. And actually I would distinguish there between clothes themselves and images, and I totally, you know, a lot of you obviously really understand that kind of distinction. And so these different platforms for clothes, which might be a gallery or a museum in your case, or a catwalk show, and these different platforms for images, which might be a screen, a small screen, a large screen, a portable screen, a static screen, you know, a magazine, a lookbook, a book, more conventionally produced book. And I think that it's very interesting to become really aware of all the nuances of those platforms and how you can use them and what kind of creative potential they offer. And so going back to your question, sorry, I think the whole, I guess the idea of the lookbook started or came to the foreground in Europe, at least in the kind of mid-80s with the Yamamoto catalogues produced by Nick Knight, Peter Saville and Mark Ascoli between sort of 1985 and 89, I think. And they were groundbreaking because they, for the first time, they functioned to communicate a kind of a philosophy of this, you know, Japanese designer presenting his work to Europe, within Europe for the first time, and sort of how to function on a more philosophical, symbolic, ideological, cultural level than previously. So
there's really not a huge focus on the clothes in them,
no,
which is
that's
so interesting. Yeah.
The kind of main feeling and atmosphere of those lookbooks is of fabric, I think. And
yeah, Nick always says when he would chat to Yoji before the shoots, like all Yoji used to say, "Show me my dreams." Like that would be all he'd say, and then Nick would play.
I think it's fabric and silhouette.
Yeah, very
those
much
are the
so.
things that are the most salient qualities of those images.
Definitely.
And that is entirely consistent with Yoji's work. So, and then obviously coming forward, however many years, 130 years, there is now, there isn't this pressure on a lookbook to function in that way, and it's much more about, I suppose, responding to the kind of hyper availability of images of collections kind of instantaneously, and making a kind of counterpoint to that, making a publication that kind of is desirable because it's perhaps very limited edition or only available to people that go to the shows, or it's posted to certain people and not to other people. And so it's about producing a sense of luxury and aspiration and exclusivity and belonging to a kind of club of a kind. And I think that's, yeah, in a way it is a little, it's very manufactured. Yeah. And that's why actually I would stand up for the magazine, because they are £6 or £10 or £15. There is a level of democracy there that I find exciting and important. But I think it's interesting. I mean, my own personal response to your question is that it is really interesting to collect something like lookbooks over a time period, because you then document the role of this printed, this platform, and I'm interested in how these platforms function, like more broadly in a cultural sense. And I think it's so important, like how whatever I'm not creating my kind of my role is not as creator, but I think everything that you're all creating is and how it's being created is really important, and that's what the printed material kind of documents.
Do you not think, we've talked a lot about lookbooks and magazines, but do you not think the campaign is one thing that I really find interesting, because I don't think that's going to exist in its current format for many years longer, because the campaign relies on this idea of the printed matter exclusively. Things like magazines, you shoot a campaign, you release it 6 months later, it goes in the magazines, and I just don't see that kind of continuing. I think even if you look at the kind of the way that brands are embracing this kind of drip feed of campaign imagery that kind of crosses like bricks and mortar stores, outside, but also online. And I think this notion of like ploughing all your money into one campaign with one photographer, it seems so antiquated. And it's interesting when you speak to the photographers themselves, a lot of them really complain about how much the budgets have been cut for campaigns, and they're expected to do the film, the campaign, and the behind the scenes, whatever, all in the same day. But I just think the campaign is kind of pointless at the moment. I don't think it functions in the most interesting way.
Well, there's definitely a shift into the need to have branded content that exists, as you said, on so many different platforms.
But when you say branded content, it makes it sound somehow less beautiful or less interesting than the campaign. But
no, but people are doing wonderful things that are smaller projects, that are mini projects.
I think also what you're talking about is more independent press. Actual campaign. That's what fuels a lot of printed matter. That's what fuels budget-wise. So if it wasn't for campaign and all those budgets, you'd have no content else.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to bring you back down to earth.
No, but that's what I'm saying. That's what's scary, is you think that
it's still how, this is pretty much like, for example, with Balenciaga, we had to do a campaign because there's no way we would not be able to do a campaign, because this is just how the mechanism works, that system. Okay, you can rebel within that system and find a way, but if you want.
Do you think that system makes sense?
I think in the world it does, because when somebody's like in the middle of nowhere, say Vladivostok opens a magazine, doesn't necessarily know much about fashion, but they will see all these images, like the first 30 pages of most of the big issues of these campaigns, and they will sort of rely. I mean, I still believe somehow they will relate to the vision in certain campaign, certain ad, certain image, and they will go and they will buy this. This is pretty much how it still works, for sure.
I think I agree with you right now, but
I think we all work in fashion, and for us, we look at it in a very different way, in a very skeptical way, in a very critical way. But like in reality, people still do.
They still want to relate
those
to that,
bags.
But you say they buy them
in those first front couple of pages.
But then, do you think in sort of even 20 years' time, that will be how it works? I don't think, like, kids that I teach or talk to, they don't engage with magazines in that same way, and that's why I completely agree with you with that system. If you open your magazine, you see the advert, you go buy the bag. I think for a huge sort of like age group of consumers, that is how it works. But I think that is changing so much, and I don't think brands are adequately preparing themselves for a system that is going to speak to those people who don't even want to buy a magazine.
I think it's changing within fashion, but I don't think it's changing worldwide in terms of like people who don't work in fashion. I think, fortunately or unfortunately, it's just a tool of communication. I think it's still pretty much influential.
The give and take of print media is very absolutely right. But perhaps what the digital side is bringing is this need to have a constantly evolving additional budget and additional media planning of other projects, and that's where advertorial comes in, and where people like, where System, for example, does an enormous Gucci story, and that also involves a party that they do in London. So there's this kind of package that is sold, and then Gucci is a good example. I think Cabana magazine recently did packaged all of their covers with Gucci fabrics, which also then led into a collaboration of making chairs together that would be fabric upholstered chairs with the same fabrics. Just sort of different ways that brands will buy into the world that a magazine is offering. Will develop further than the campaign, absolutely, but also, online too is the way that advertising works online is very different, and it's not as black and white as print either. But I think everybody is still debating and discussing how these things work.
Do you not think magazines have just become brands in themselves, though?
They have to be.
Like they have festivals, they have...
But in a good way as well, just like those things that I just described. I think some of them are fantastic, and I think they're culturally rich. I think they do provoke and excite people to go to a mad out town party at the ICA last Friday in London and see cool talks and see great DJs, and magazines are bastions of culture in different ways.
I agree, but I also feel, like Lotta mentioned, obviously we all work in fashion. We're very much so looking at everything that we do with a certain magnifying glass. I've never been a magazine consumer. I never grew up buying fashion magazines or watching fashion television or anything like that. So I can understand as well, at the end of the day, what we're talking about, especially when we're talking about brands who have campaigns that cost a fortune to put into magazines, these are huge brands. And these brands aren't necessarily selling what you would see, say, on the runway. They're selling other products. In my mind, I still think physically buying a fashion magazine is kind of a little bit of a fan behavior. I think it's even if you think about going to something like Vogue Runway, obviously I think a lot of the people in the room today probably sit and look at the collections when it's Fashion Week and so on, but I think we forget that this is kind of a little bit fan-like behavior. This is really specific. I don't think the general woman who's buying the €2,000 bag once a year for her husband that's buying it for her is actually sitting and carrying around magazines and bringing them home, or actually sat in the morning looking at the collections as they're coming out. I think we kind of forget a little bit that this is very acute kind of behavior for us.
I wanted that.
But I think a more strategic and somewhat more subconscious placement, where really product placement, especially in certain publications like the Financial Times or more newspapers and so on, that's really, I think, what will fundamentally, if you actually did an analysis of what's selling the products, if you were able to actually track it down from the store, the transaction, right through to any kind of level of visual advertisement or influence, it definitely wouldn't be even the vogue.
Because don't you find it funny that we, the fashion people, who frankly probably don't, I hate calling myself that, but we, the fashion people, we're the ones who are most heavily marketed at. You know, the amazing niche publications or like these amazing projects that we talk about, they're bought and consumed by fashion people. But then the brands invest so heavily in them and kind of not just invest in terms of money, but invest control, invest like putting content there and doing these interesting projects, and then they're consumed by the fans that you talk about. And those are people who probably actually don't have the money to buy the clothes or get the clothes for free or on personal order, but then they're still being aggressively marketed at.
Yeah.
It's really, really weird, isn't it?
Well, we can agree that it's an aspirational territory in the end, and it's a place where it is the upper edge, it is the niche, and it is, everything does, of course, filter down and perhaps have more. I mean, it's a very potent place that we're talking about, but in the end, obviously, that all filters down.
I don't know if it does that,
Yeah.
I wonder if it does that.
Perhaps that's the wrong visual. But, no, but in general, there are so many different areas within which this media exists and within which these collections will exist. You know, there could be a Chloe Blouse in the Soar magazine, but also it will find itself in Mary Claire, in, I don't know.
I'm not saying that these magazines, I think niche publications or style publications are fantastic. What I take issue with is the level of control that brands bizarrely try and put into those magazines, when those magazines probably aren't going to be the things that sell them the product. They're going to be the things that do what, which is what Lodger was saying right at the start, which is create beautiful imagery that does push things forward. But then it's like brands are stopping them from doing that by trying to exercise so much control, when these aren't the magazines that are even going to really sell any product, probably, because they're already consumed by fans, as Thomas said. To tie everyone's points together.
I think a lot of these kinds of brands and these publications, it's very much so more of a political exercise within the industry. I think it's a lot to do with sort of petting your own ego and trying to prove that you have the most influence, or, you know, it's also a transactional exercise.
And in the end, the content that's created within those magazines, whether or not you shoot a total look, whether or not, wherever their product is present, it becomes something that they're able to use to prove to their own internal teams that they've achieved these set of goals. They're also able to use those images for their own social media, that are going to go on the Instagram of Prada as a editorial of the week. All those things. I mean, in the end, of course, it does service their needs to keep creating that content. I'm going to move on. We're going to have a look at...
I want to know, what do you think about it? Because you're a different generation to us, because you're like 20. What do you and your friends think? Do you like magazines?
I always love magazines, but I never bought like all the big established magazines, but more in the, as a art, in the art film, I don't know. And I like the
As an object.
Yeah, as an object.
object.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I don't know.
Do you think buying them is a slight reaction, because you're kind of a digital native, and it's interesting that you talk about them as objects, whereas people of an older generation maybe talk about them as like sources of news or sources of information, but to you it seems very
I think that's not really lost now.
Yeah,
It's impossible to produce a magazine.
You can find news like so much easier than like Instagram. You search on your phone, you can find way more.
I mean, you see news
And,
immediately, every
yeah,
5 minutes.
everything.
It's impossible to wait for a month for a magazine to come out.
Yeah, but even as a source of information, it's much more about even something that you maybe don't even read, you just have it.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like the materialistic aspect kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I buy magazines actually. Like I stopped buying them for a moment a couple of years ago, and then maybe in the last 5 years I started buying them again. It's literally, it's like an object, you know.
Yeah.
Something attracts you. I don't know, the color, the cover, the way it's printed, but like of course the contents and certain images are interesting.
And that's another good point that independent publishing can continue to bring to brands and to designers young and old and established and emerging, the fact that what the object that they produce is beautiful, that they can have special inserts, that they can have beautiful covers with different techniques on them, that they can use amazing gold foil, like this one here.
I feel it's almost like talking about it's almost like fetishes, you know?
Absolutely.
Like I go down to the shop and I'm like, oh my god, it's like something that attracts me, that talks to me.
But it's not purely the aesthetic of it. The aesthetics of a printed matter are not contained and meaningless. One thing that we haven't mentioned is the sequence or pattern of a series of images, which is really important in terms of communicating an idea or a perspective or a position in relation to, of one designer in relation to another or in relation to their fashion, their context. And so that patterning and sequencing is something that you cannot do online because you cannot control the sequence in which people look at images online, or even whether they're looking at Instagram and a video and they're listening to music at the same time. And so for me, that's a very, very important kind of relationship between the aesthetic and the kind of more, the deeper meaning of this platform, like the magazine platform. And the other thing is printing is kind of an aesthetic experience, but it's also very tactile and it relates to clothing, in that way. And gloss, a gloss pages for me is much more about sex than a kind of linen, fiber-based whatever. Where I just don't pick it up.
Absolutely.
It's like recycled denim paper or something, like canned paper.
Sorry.
All right. Well, so we're going to quickly move on and have a look at some of Lotta's work, and starting with the Balenciaga Winter 16-17 show, which was Demna Gvasalia's debut at the House, and it is, in my perspective, a very interesting fashion show, and is tying into what I was mentioning earlier about the backlash back towards products being so much a part of the story of fashion again, which has in the last years been somewhat blurred by this huge push of Anna Wintour and of Vogue, of this idea of the return to the individual and individuality, and everything is about mashing up, and a collection is no longer about a system. It's been all about these embracing these different girls that don't that all have these fierce personalities, and that they're more like figureheads for a brand, and each look in a show is all adorned with different jewelry and different. Maybe I think John Galliano's Margiela is a very good example of that. This idea of a very strong individual in each look, and I think was quite exciting and interesting in the way that Demna started at Balenciaga and also with Vetements, was the fact that he made a list. And his idea with each collection was that he sat down and he said, we need coat, we need jacket, we need shirt, we need denim, we need shoe, we need boot, we need bag. And I think this is quite interesting, and even just looking at the show in this slideshow, you can even begin to see how systematic that return is. And I wanted to ask Lotta how that is as a part of styling these clothes as well, and how you guys work in terms of, it's not about all these looks at the moment with everything's it's hard to explain, but there has been this huge sort of idea of this sort of artsy, creative, artisanal vision. This is almost like the opposite, and it's back to the idea of normal clothes.
Well, it's back to reality somehow, we don't necessarily get inspired by going on a trip to Thailand, We love clothes, and we produce clothes for ourselves, and that's kind of how Vetements started in a sense, conceptually. It's an idea of wardrobe, and that's what you mean by Demna making the list of, okay, now we need a tailored jacket, a bomber, what do we wear? What do we wear every day? Our friends, etc. So it's the idea of exploring wardrobe and pieces of wardrobe that you need every day, whether you go to work, or you go to party, or you go to school, or whatever. So in a sense, it's coming back to reality, and designing product, making clothes, real clothes that are desirable, that you want to wear, and etc. It's also not about this kind of design masturbation It's about making something that's really functional. And okay, it has a certain kind of aesthetic that we like. Of course, a strong kind of aesthetic. You know, it's about volume. It's about looking at clothes in a sculptural way. But in reality, it's really down to earth. It's about making clothes that people want to buy, people want to wear.
So
Initially.
would you be frustrated being at Balenciaga if, like, working, because obviously with Vetements, it is completely kind of about the clothes, but going to a luxury house, there's always that pressure on the shoe and the bag, but is there that kind of
Oh, but take it as a
realization?
challenge. I have nothing against the shoe in the bag.
But you
I love
want to
shoes
sell the
and I love
clothes.
bags, you know. I prefer shoes though, but anyway. No, we take it as a challenge. For example, like, okay, every big house, especially a part of, you know, one of those big groups, like LVMH or Kering, you know, they have certain like budget heights that they have to meet, you know, there are lots of marketing directions, etc. But, you know, like, for example, when we have our fittings and when we have our meetings regarding making shoes for the new collection, you know, there is a marketing person there always saying, okay, we need to make espadrille. I mean, I've never worn espadrille in my life, right? But then me and Jenna like, all right, bloody espadrille. Oh, once an espadrille in November. But apparently there are many places in the world where they do. So we take it as a challenge, you know, okay, let's make a pair of espadrille that I would wear. You know, so we made this crazy platform espadrille, you know, like sort of inspired by one of those from the show, and you know, like sort of 70s Bowie Hill, and you know, that's the kind of stuff I'd wear. So that's kind of how we approach it. It's very, but it's definitely a challenge. It's an everyday challenge over there. But I mean, it's incredible because you have the budget, you have the resources, you have the factories, and yeah, I love working in such a big house. Actually, I find it much more liberating in a sense than working for a young designer because you have so many more opportunities. It just depends how you look at it, you know.
Yeah.
Like, and we find it quite fun actually. Yeah.
Do you think this is related to economics, to our economic climate, that you almost have now a kind of polarization of like utility and practicality and reality, and then you have this extreme fantasy, and there's nothing in between?
You can make it merge. I really believe in that, you know, and that's what, like, for me when we work with Demna, it's it's really fun. It just I feel like whatever it is, you can make it your own, and whatever you need, you know, what kind of whatever you need to meet, you can find a way of doing it in your own way. And I've always believed in that, and I think that's kind of been the driving force in general for what I do. Definitely Demna. Perhaps it's a Russian thing, I don't know. That Gosha has to say, you know. But I think for us the difference is that we really look at clothes and shows and way of product, you know. We want to make clothes that we want to wear. It's not about creating fantasy, it's not about creating a narrative, to be honest. It's about, you know, it consists of different narratives in a way, but in reality it's really down to this look.
What did you think about all the fallout from the show in terms of sort of the casting and the all-white casting? Was that difficult?
Not at all. You know what? I mean, it was quite surprising in a sense that, like, we never meant to offend anyone, obviously, and it was surprising. I mean, for me, it was quite shocking. I do admit also because we have quite a varied casting. We've always been known for quite a varied casting. For example, we have Russian gay people in the show. You know, no one's talking about that. And you know, so in a sense that, like, okay, it's a very awkward moment. You know, that's for sure. But for example, these days it's so hypocrite because, you know, most of the shows that you work for, you need to put at least 2 ethnic models. 3 is better, and then you have no problem. And that's what people do. They do it just for the sake of it. You know. So anyway, we take it as a challenge now. So you know, we're never meant to offend anyone. So
I think you're right in saying that in a way that, you know, I noticed it as well. Whatever. I'm not here to voice my opinion on that, but what you just mentioned, I think there's a lot of shit that designers and brands take because of the lack of diversity in their casting. But actually, what a lot of people don't know is that in the packages, you don't really have the option. There's so few.
But you know, personally, in absolute, I think it should come naturally. You know,
it should. Exactly.
It should come naturally. I think, for example, Hood by Air is great, and it makes complete sense that all of the certified models are.
It's so transparent when you see the brand. It literally has the one Asian girl, the one black girl.
It can be very token.
If you're lucky, one Indian girl, and it's literally just ticking those boxes. It's so clear. And I have heard people sort of talk about it, and they've just been like, okay, well that part of the job is done. We got it out of the way, which is pathetic.
And I think what's also really interesting is that, you know, going back to all the model agencies, and look how many, like, you have those model packages every season, right? With, I don't know how many, 40 models, let's say. How many of those models are black?
Yeah.
How do agents and scouts actually go to Africa, which is one of like the biggest continents, right? There are so many beautiful, beautiful people there.
Yeah.
But what you see in the package is literally like a couple of girls.
What's weird is I've spoken to casting agents, but specifically people who work at modelling agencies like this, so directors of modelling agencies or people who scout, and they all say the problem they have is if they take too many black girls, they cannibalise each other's work because no one will book them. But I just don't know if I believe that. So they say they take more.
I think it's a very lazy.
I think there's a lot of laziness across the industry. I completely agree with what you were saying, Thomas, about it's like as soon as a casting agent puts in one black girl on the show, one Asian girl on the show, it's like they can't be criticised then, and it's like ticking a box.
That's a catch-22. By behaving that way, you're basically just fueling, you know, that limitation.
But it's exactly what you said. It's about ticking boxes, unfortunately.
I'd like to go back to this show in particular as well, because it was the blank slate for the label, and it was the beginning, and Demna explained some very interesting ideas about taking that tradition of Balenciaga and using this sort of C-shaped curve of the couture days of the house and modernising that and bringing that into clothes for today. I'm interested in perhaps how that was for you as well, to be involved with that, and also which parts of this collection ended up, maybe it's too early to say because it's on the shop floor, but what did people respond to the best in this collection? Do you think it was?
I think the red puffer jacket.
Yeah.
And the bag of the season.
And the bags, you guys, the one that you did at the end of the show? Or
Yeah.
We're going to see that in a minute if we're going to keep going through. And Thomas, what about you in terms of this idea of this practicality and luxury existing within the collection together? What are the things that people respond to the most in your work and in stores, and what would you feel like people go to? Because today, the idea of basics from a luxury brand is also very. People try and make the perfect white t-shirt and that sort of thing, but that's not what people are going to go to you for, is it?
Yeah, no, I mean the thing is there's a difference between what people can associate in terms of the product, what people associate with me and talk about, to actually what people tend to buy.
Exactly.
Then again, I have a very, very small pool of retailers, so the distribution is teeny tiny. I would like it to be bigger, but it's difficult for us to do sort of a proper analysis and a range plan based off of existing sales or historical sales, because it does fluctuate quite a bit, and it really will depend on the season. I'm definitely not necessarily in the sort of school of Rick Owens or Peter Appelman or something where you can really see that it's very similar kind of look. I tend to sort of want to talk about different things per season. Also, where the clothing is coming from, my background is very technical before studying at Smartens. It was very much so about product development. So I personally very attached, and I enjoy working with my hands and working on the actual clothes, but I do very much so sit on the fence between the reality of the product and also sort of a understanding of what it is to be a woman, admiration, fascination. I'm not the person who's wearing it. I'm not, I can't physically get into most of the clothes. It's, I don't really have an immediate understanding of it. So it is kind of, in a way, I still kind of have one foot in what is perhaps, this kind of fantasy of fashion that was probably more popular, 20 years ago. But I also am very much so grounded in the product development side of things, which is a personal fascination.
Can I ask something about I'm obsessed with the wording and the way you use branding, because some of the puffers, they had Balenciaga written across the back, didn't they? And I'm interested because you talk like you're interested in kind of clothes and silhouettes, but I feel like, particularly with Vetements and Balenciaga, there's definitely an interest in like graphics and typography and wording. And where does that come from?
Gosha as well.
Yeah, definitely, of course, in Gosha.
Well, for Vetements, the last, I think you're talking about last season.
Yeah.
Before last season, there's never been as many
words,
of course, for branding. I'm personally not really, I'm kind of against the idea of a logo. But with Vêtements last season, it was basically all the slogans came from Instagram.
Yeah.
So it was something that sort of generates around us, and that was sort of a remix of, you know, what kind of we get, the slogans we get bombarded with, and you know, and something that honestly them is so quite funny, like drink for me and live forever. Anyway,
The bridges are done.
excuse me.
The bridges are done.
Yeah, that's the sensitive one. I think that was much more personal for them, that particular one. And you fucking asked what that meant too. Anyway, but for Balenciaga that's different. For example, big puffer jacket, say, with Balenciaga logo at the back, you know, that comes from the real sports jacket, the North Face jacket. And so all the branding and the placement of logos come from that, you know.
Sure.
So it's not, you know, something that we just decide to put there, like, oh,
Because
it's a piece inspired from sportswear, so that we are quite interested in treating the logo that way, you know, and place it in a certain way that, you know.
Because the piece that I love, I think, is going to be sort of everywhere, that is the big scarf that you've done. But isn't that a replica of
The scarf?
the big scarf that says Balenciaga?
Oh!
The fur. Isn't that a replica
yeah.
of a label, the couture label?
Yes,
Is that right?
It also looks a bit like a doormat, I think. We should put it.
You can use it as a brand. But I think
You're talking about the pre-collection.
the pre-collection, yeah. But I thought that was very interesting, this idea of making things so modern out of something very traditional and typical, like in clothing.
I mean, I think that's kind of what Dem does quite a lot. It subverts, you know, like you have something you need to make, then like, how do we do it? We subvert it. You know?
Yeah. Cool.
Well, I think that with that we're just going to have a 5-minute break to get some fresh air, and we're going to come back and we're going to delve a little bit more into the side of photography and photography's role in creating fashion narratives. So have a little 5 minutes. Thanks for listening, everybody. We are going to kick off the second shorter part of the talk by looking at a little bit of Paul's work. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I thought it was quite interesting to bring Paul along to this talk because he occupies quite an interesting space in the sort of wider sphere of what we're talking about today, because he is a polymath and he's doing many different things, and I think that's quite exciting, and it ties into a lot of what we're talking about. And firstly, I wanted to show you, if we could go to the next slide, please, some of Paul's collage work, and talk about some of his projects that are coming up as well, because Paul has entered the industry at a young age. He's from Paris, living in Paris, also as a part of, as somebody who has, as he just admitted, and is interested in print publications and media, and is actively searching this out for himself, and has at the same time become a part of the industry, working with Lotta and a lot of other labels and stylists and magazines recently as a model, but that's sort of part of a role that's also crossing over in his life, which we're going to see shortly, and some of this collage work is the beginning of that. And if we can just also go to the next slide again. Maybe you could tell us about what you've been working on recently and your plans for the next couple of months.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, recently I've been working on a zine called Brave New World, in reference to Huxley's novel, Brave New World, because it's all my collages are more or less like it's a critique of the society, of like taking an example on utopias and dystopias. So yeah, that explains the title. It's a publication that my work won't be featured in it. It's only my friends' work, like really close friends, as much as like well-known names, as much as like people that I know since I'm 10 years old, that are still studying art, etc. Limited to 200 edition. And besides that, I'm also working on another publication that's featuring only my collages, which is in the making at the moment. And that's...
And you're launching that in June, is that right?
Yeah, the Brave New World is in June in Paris to launch. It will only be sold by then, or maybe, yeah, only. And that's pretty much it.
And could you tell us about some of the people that are going to be in the zine? Because what I think is quite exciting about that is that sort of switch that you've created between turning around from being photographed by people to actually inciting them as a publisher to work with them in a completely different way.
Yeah, there's Kolyesha, Willy van de Peur, Joscha Obczynski. Yeah, and after Pierre Scarletti and friends that you want, people that I know from, it's quite international. Like I have a friend from New York that's a painter called Kathleen Anderson, and a friend called Anne Crabo, which is like, she studies at the L'Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris. So it's just like I didn't give them any information about it, I just gave them the title and asked them to like give me some work that it never was published or made for the zine especially. And yeah, I just tried to create some kind of harmony, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. I think it's really interesting as well in the fact that it's an extension and a reflection of part of the community that you guys have been fostering recently with the work that you've been doing, and the sort of link that has with all these different artists around the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think I see it as a personal diary without me writing it, because I think that it's your surroundings. You have your inner self that's like that, like I don't know, like clay, and your surrounding shapes it more or less. So like shapes your person, your identity, etc. Like my really close friend did with me, because as you said, I entered this world, I guess, at a young age, and everybody teaches and learns from them, and that's what relationships are based on. Anyways. And so yeah, I see it as a reflection of myself and just like my close friends.
Going back to this idea of like dream world, do you think that's part of the thing that today makes, like whether it's a young designer or whoever a bigger brand, part of what seems to sort of be a part of kind of a strategy now? I think you guys have it quite authentically. It's this idea of like a gang or a group of people or a community. Like that's such a big. Everyone's trying to do that now. But I wonder if do you guys think that's part of the appeal of you know, your friendship group and the sort of brands that are associated with that is this idea of it being a community?
Yeah,
I mean, we're friends because we have certain interests, we have certain similarities, and what we like, what we're influenced by. For me, it's very old school way of, I don't know, forming some kind of social group. You know, it's like you go to a concert, you see someone who looks cool, who listens to the same music as you become friends. You obviously share the same aesthetic, and like this, you start producing work together. It's just been quite productive, to be honest. I think that's kind of the difference. But that's pretty much how we all met, really. You know, it's the same how I met Thomas, for example. Lighting, you know, it's just, yeah, where you meet people with the same kind of like interests, and you share a certain vision, and then it comes quite naturally. You know, we never tried to make this gang. Now it's like, oh my God, you and your gang in Paris.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it is something.
No, people blow it up out of proportion. When all it is, it's like it's quite a natural, cool way of mingling and becoming friends and just doing something together. You know, and yes, for us, for example, with Mom initially, with Gosha, with Bianche, with whoever we work with, Collier, etc. You know, we like to enjoy. We love what we do. For us, it's a pleasure, and we really enjoy working. So for us, we just try to make it as much fun as possible, and that's why, of course, it's more fun to work with your friends. We share the same aesthetic, we share the same ideas, we share, you know, the same goals, and that's kind of how it all came together. And yeah, but media really tends to blow things out of proportion.
Yeah, very much so.
Especially these days. But yeah.
How did you two first meet, actually?
Oh, we met through Alban Adam. Yeah, he introduced us.
Because you've done quite a lot of collaborations and shoots and things.
Well,
together.
we met about 3 years ago now. So and we knew we liked the same music, and so we kind of like initially clicked, and we felt like we knew each other for a long time straight away, you know. And then we just started going to gigs together, and
we organized a party.
Oh, we organized the party. I tend to forget it. Yeah, it was called Dance Pole. It was really fun. Right. It was in a cave under Paul's apartment in the Marais. And it was quite a deep cave. You had to go down a couple of floors. It was amazing. It looked like catacombs. And then it was like you arrived into space, and with like neon lights and sound system, and we invited loads and loads of friends. Like, Because Paris before, I feel like something has changed in Paris in the last couple of years. It has become much more fun, there's much more energy going on. But I think it's really because people started to kind of mix, you know. And that was kind of like the idea for me for that party, that we would invite all sorts of people, you know, like so my girls' friends, some Chinese, you know, like our friends, you know, all the photographers we work with, and suddenly it was like this whole fun energy, you know, that you put together. So yeah. Anyway, so we did that party together. It was fun. we did a few. Quite a few others.
And what is your plan with the zine and with your collage work as well for the future? What is your plan?
Like in the future on a big scale?
Yeah.
How long in the future?
I don't know, I mean, I try a lot of things. For example, there's not only my artwork, there's this thing of publishing, like students, etc. Like I have two, that's one that's ready and the other one that I'm working on. I DJ a bit here and there, like I'm really interested to learn how to like create music and play in films as well, which I did twice. So I don't know, I'm just like trying to, there's not like especially the collage, but I'm just trying new things, and just like as soon as I have a project, like for example I have a little just like take
make
it
lists
down and after,
We're all about making lists.
What were the films you were in again?
It was Francophonia by, what's his name, by Sokurov, and like 4 Tours Glow by Dennis Cooper. Yeah, Dennis Cooper.
Very nice. All right, we're going to move on to the next study, which is a little bit more of Lars' work and something that I'm really excited about. Next slide, please. From the new System magazine, and I wanted to show you this shoot because I think it's interesting what we were talking about, what Lars was talking about before, how she doesn't like to shoot fashion necessarily and how she likes to shoot normal clothes. And this shoot, for me, represents probably some of Jürgen Teller's best work in quite a long time.
Wow.
I'm interested. I'm a very big fan of it, so we're going to have a look at some of these images. Could you tell us where you shot it?
Well, basically, System asked Jürgen to do a Gucci special. So what we decided to do is to do like a 3-day trip throughout Europe. So basically, I went to Mark Clinique in Austria to meet Jürgen. He loves to spend. Yeah, he loves to spend weeks and weeks there. It's a kind of a clinique to sort of a rehab, basically, to cleanse your body. And a lot of fashion people like to go there when they reach a certain age. Anyway, and so I went there to meet him. And so that's in Austria, but just by the border with Slovenia and Italy. And we took a car. It was basically Jürgen's assistant, me, no assistant, and the model. So basically 4 of us, no hair, makeup, or anything like that. So quite DIY and easy. And we just kept 2 cars, one of them obviously full of Gucci pre-fall, and we drove through the most incredible nature and Alps and forest and snow and rivers and whatever. It was quite crazy. I've never been in Alps before, so it was really beautiful. And we just literally drove from Austria, Slovenia, and then through Italy. And it was very fun. It was very spontaneous. So like Jürgen would be like, "Oh, this tree looks really good. Let's stop here." So we get out of the car and all in the snow and a poor naked girl freezing, and he would take a couple of pictures and we'd drive a bit further and take a couple of pictures more. And then we found this tank, not a tank. Tank in Russian. Tank, just by the Slovenian border with Austria, which was like so weird, in the middle of nowhere, literally in the middle of the forest. So we went to the tank and we were taking some pictures there, it was quite a fun experience and quite a bonding trip, you know, freezing in the cold for a couple of days and then arriving finally. Of course, it was during Milan Fashion Week and Jürgen wanted to go to the store, to the Gucci store, right on Via Monte Napoleone and take some pictures of the product. And of course, you just come from 2 days of being in the forest and boots up to here in the middle of bloody Milan Fashion Week, bumping into practically the whole fashion world there in truck suit. Again, sometimes I find it even more interesting to work with something that doesn't necessarily talk to you directly, you know, or in a very natural way. So basically, I wanted to do. I mixed a lot of menswear. It's basically menswear and women's wear together, and I used all our men's clothes on here, and just kind of like mixing it all up and like trashing it up in a way. For Jürgen, he kind of like had a little idea of the shoot. He shot a lot of landscapes on the first day, when, you know, the girl was basically practically naked, very pure and very naive and innocent, in the middle of this forest, in the middle of the snow, you know. And for him, that was kind of the idea. So you start there, very pure, and then slowly throughout the story, she kind of like emerges out of this like nature, wearing these clothes, and she's sort of like walking her way towards the civilization, basically, towards consumerism. And that's why like we basically, while driving through Italy, while driving through, voila, we ended up in a car destroying factory. How do you call that properly? I don't know. Yeah, voila. And he was so excited. He was like, oh my god, taking pictures of all these cars being crashed together and this trash. He was like, oh my god, this is just like those bags. This is just like those bags in a shopping window, you know, like wow. And so basically she ends up there, you know, like in the end, and that's why he wanted to go to the store and take pictures of the product to kind of like, you know, echo this whole idea of, you know, over-consuming.
So that's why there's that last weird picture where there's like the tie.
Yeah, we did many. They put us one in.
Was that she's eating McDonald's in...
Oh yeah, but that was it. Yeah, we had to stop. Oh, yeah, because after the Maya clinic, you know, you get practically no food there. All you get is a soup like this. I had to stay there one night. I don't know how he does it for 10 days, honestly. You get a soup like this. This is what you eat the entire day. And you have to eat it with the tiniest spoon. I mean, it's masochist, honestly. I know people are saying this. And you eat it like that with little bread. It's not bread. God knows what it's made of. Anyway, terrible. So then as soon as we left that clinic, I mean, I've never wanted to eat junk food as much in my whole life as I did that morning when we drove away. When we saw the Burger King in our way, it was like, wow, revelation. Anyway, so we stopped there, and it's funny because she wanted to have fries. She just wanted to eat fries. She didn't even want to have a burger with it. It's quite bizarre. So we got her those 3 packs of fries that she asked for, and she was sitting outside eating them. And Jürgen was like, yeah, this is perfect, this is it. You know, like, and that picture, do you have that picture?
Actually,
and she's wearing this fur coat, you know, and it was this buttons made out of diamonds, so God knows what, and it's practically, the layering fabrics, and quite expensive, obviously, and quite luxurious outfit. And she's eating those fries in the Burger King little crown, so yeah, that was quite funny.
I'm going to find that picture for everybody.
I have to find it, no, it's not connected.
It's not connected, but...
Oh!
Please come and have a look later, but I'll show you.
No, but it was quite natural, you know, just like all the things you come across, and that's why it was quite fun to do the road trip, you know, like it gives you so many opportunities and so many things, and I mean, Jürgen shoots so fast and so much, it's quite insane, you know, like literally, I sweat when I shoot this, it's impossible. Like he shoots an outfit, like, okay, 2 pictures done, it's great, isn't it great? He always goes like, isn't it great, it's great, yeah, it's great, next one, and like, yeah, so no, it was quite intense couple of days. Anyway, that's all.
The Mayo Clinic is itself part of that whole dialectic of like excess and restriction and indulgence and lack of
very obsessive
control.
Yeah.
I was talking to Lucy before actually about Jürgen's work, and we were talking about iconic books and things that, and we're going to have a look at another one of her choices later on, but maybe you could mention a word of his work in that sort of countercultural fashion narrative that he likes to bring into things, just the very fact that he wanted to turn Gucci on its head, and it's something that's been so important in his work for such a long time.
Yeah, I think Jürgen's obviously been a very central part of the world of fashion photography for a long time, and he's someone who is kind of commercially, in terms of what I do, very important, and people have collected what he does for a long time, collected magazines, lookbooks, books, anything really that he does. t-shirts. I have a great t-shirt, actually.
I need to get one.
So great.
I saw
so
it.
cool for you.
Ashley showed it to me, and I completely forgot I wanted to buy it. And then I saw it on Instagram.
It's quite funny.
Please keep one for me.
Because his surname, Teller, means plate in German as well, so he's also just done this whole series of plates.
Yeah,
So it's his self-portrait, because whoever holds that plate, that's kind of his
which is what I was going to mention. So having kind of followed the trajectory of his work for the last 25 years, what's happening now I think is really interesting, because he's kind of gone through this transition from, in terms of his broader identity, from being strictly a fashion photographer, I guess, to operating more within the art world as well. And I think over the last sort of 5 years or so, that's been a binary kind of identity that hasn't necessarily always worked well. And yet what I think he's doing now, particularly in the platform of magazines, is like creating incredible work it just ignores that opposition, or that kind of these boundaries of discipline, so it's like it doesn't really matter whether we see it as art or as fashion or whatever. He's really doing something to me that I think is really exciting, and with other people, it's a very collaborative process, and it's about a lot of it is really about himself in a kind of, the Mayo Clinic being somewhere that he goes often, or has done over the last few years, and this new project that he's doing for a series of exhibitions in an art context called Teller, which are based on the fact that Teller in German means plate, and so he's produced a whole series of life-size plates that have his own imagery printed on them, and the people that he works with, or his friends, are photographed by Jürgen holding these plates. It's kind of...
when you say life-size, do you mean like head-sized?
Well,
no,
there are different plates. There are plates
that's
big and normal, so I know I've held that plate. Anyway, there are normal size, and then there's like massive ones like this. So the one that's on the cover of Renown Plus was Ralph Siemens holding it. He's sort of coming out a bit, hiding. Yeah, this is like massive, huge. Yeah.
And I think that this kind of, there's definitely now with the kind of celebration of the identity of the model, for example, the personality of the model now in fashion, which is very important. There's often this kind of emphasis on the authentic and the individual identity, and it's often kind of manufactured to a huge degree. With Jürgen, conversely, I guess he's not an 18-year-old model. He's someone that's spent years and years and years kind of being deeply involved in his work, and I think it's super interesting now what's happening in terms of him using kind of the platform that he has to make really interesting work. Now I'm not really saying it, I'm just saying it's good.
I think it's just made it much more personal recently, and it's just such a funny, crazy guy, like whatever you give him, he's gonna do the opposite, he's gonna subvert it. It's like, for me, it's very old school act, old school punk, when they really have to subvert everything.
And he comes from his world in London, he's married to Sadie Coles, she's one of the arbiters of, was one of the arbiters of the YBA movement in Britain, so, and their connection to punk obviously is very clearly documented. So that is definitely there, and I think,
We don't have much longer, so I'm going to quickly have a look at our last two projects. This one is a project that I worked on recently, and I'd be very happy to have other people's take on it because I'm very involved with it. But this was a project, a photo project, which is actually on the table in front of you if anyone would like to come and have a look later. It is an extension of A Magazine into a side project we called Nudes, curated by Julian Docena. Julian is the current creative director of Paco Rabanne, and as he was the president of the fashion jury at the HERE Festival this year, we actually invited him to create this publication with us, which was inspired by a book from 1969 that was photographed by John Clemmer, and John Clemmer was a French photographer working a lot with Salvador Dali and also working with Paco Rabanne himself. And this book was a very, very beautiful and quite daring nude study in the late 60s, and it was a mix of all the Paco Rabanne metal pieces photographed on all different kinds of girls, black girls, Asian girls, white girls, all sort of in these rapturous, erotic, pre-orgasmic poses on the beach in the studio. It was this very sort of outrageous expression of female nudity and eroticism at the time, and it was also accompanied by a relatively controversial interview with Paco, in which he compared what he'd done in the book with all of the advertising and media interpretation of women at the time and sort of the current zeitgeist of eroticism. So what we decided to do is take a fresh look at that and work with Coco Capitan, who's a young Spanish photographer who has worked already with the house quite a lot, and who herself has a very very new and very fresh and young vision of womanhood and of femininity. And it's quite interesting as well to note she herself is a lesbian, and she has a female gaze on the female body, and we found that very interesting as well to look at this time. So what we did was we went down to the Villa Noailles, which is where the Hyères Festival takes place, and we photographed a series of girls mixing the archives of Paco Rabanne from the 60s and 70s with modern pieces of Julian, and we created this photo document. And go to the next slide, thanks. This as well is quite an interesting study of branded content, which goes above and beyond campaign or advertorial. What it was a project that, yes, it was paid by the Maison Paco Rabanne to fund it as a small print publication, and it's quite interesting as a bridge between those worlds of a brand producing its own content or an interpretation. It was quite a middle ground collaboration, which is something that we have done a lot with A Magazine.
What's interesting is also it shows like the currency of like older things. Like it was interesting when you were talking to Thomas before about remaking pieces through this collection, and like also what you were saying to Lucy about collecting old lookbooks. I think there's definitely this kind of like a market or an excitement in older things. You know, you see it, it's such a cliche, we talk about it all the time, but you see it on Instagram, like people love old shoots, old photographs, old icons, and I think this idea at the moment that people seem to have of sort of remaking or reconsidering older things is really interesting. Like I think about it a lot in terms of fashion, like how brilliant would it be if you went to a Prada show and they just redid like Spring Summer '96 and it was exactly the same, because it would be just as relevant now as it was then, if not maybe more relevant and more exciting. And I think that's fascinating.
You make a really good point there. I think there's a kind of a sense of comfort today and with our generation where people have perhaps a bit more confidence now to function or work reactively. And I think it's something that it's been beaten into our heads a little bit of, having to, there's commercial responsibilities in the industry, and obviously we have systems of working and trying to analyze the way that things are successful. But it's also, I think, something that you can really see a lot more today in how people work as creative people, even fashion designers. I think if you think of Margiela as well, where you have an existing product, you have something that can be reinterpreted. I think people have a comfort to.
It's the age of referencing.
Yeah, not just referencing, but also just reappropriating things, and also, self-referencing. I think you can see that at Prada, you can see it at Comme des Garçons.
Yeah.
Even if you see the way that Dover Street Market is curated, a lot of the young brands are very much so brought in as a complement to Comme des Garçons and to Dover Street Market in general, where it is almost encouraged to reference the greats of your past.
Absolutely. Which brings us to our very last study, if you wanted to mention something before we...
I just wanted to say that history and the past are now democratic in a way that they haven't been previously ever, and they are material in their own right, and that's what's happened since the inception of the internet. History has become a material, which I find very exciting.
And it ties into that idea of, we talk about worlds and gangs and everything like that. A lot of what adds substance to particularly young designers, is also like who they reference, who they're interested in, who their icons are. Like, you know, that's part of what the story of a different brand is. Also, like what decades are like, you know, what that history is. It's the obsessions they have that make them interesting. Like, it's interesting just because you were talking about Gucci. Like, that is definitely part of the charm and the appeal of Gucci. Is you look at Alessandro Michele and you think that he is someone who was definitely obsessed by certain things, whether it's certain periods in history, certain objects, certain artworks. And I think that's the best young designers and the best young brands tend to be ones where you can tell immediately what things from the past they love and why they love them. And I think that's really interesting. It's almost like they're interesting because of their references and the history that they.
It's easier to create a dialogue.
Yeah, it is. That's true.
It's to do with communication and shared language, I think. And Paul said, to me, it's very interesting that, you know, one of the things you just said was that our identities are like clay and we're shaped by people around us. And for me, that's like a very contemporary way of thinking about.
But also that idea, Lotte, you said it about Paul in your friendship. You said, "Oh, he likes the things I like," and I think that is with buying into a brand. You like the idea that the brand likes the things that you like. Obviously, a brand can't like something, but that the brand references or is engaged with the things that you're interested in. So it can't just be the design; it's got to be that world and those references and that history. I think about that a lot.
Thomas, is that a way of working for you? Do you work with the past? Because I feel your work has a subtlety to it that doesn't emit those things so obviously.
It's not so much, there are elements about how I work, but it's usually something I only notice later. I don't necessarily collect things so much, and I don't really do mood boards or things like that, so it's not so reactive. And then there's also my attachment and fascination to product development, which kind of constantly leads me to try and do things that are fundamentally new. But yeah, I think it's, that's one thing. I think people have often thought that I'm a bit guarded with my references, or that, you know, I don't necessarily want to talk about my inspirations, and I feel like I've always been quite transparent about not really having a very clear set inspiration.
You don't have that trip to Thailand.
Yeah, there isn't that trip to Thailand. No. So yeah, it's a little bit. It's very kind of. It's very personal in a way, and I don't really realize how personal it is because I don't necessarily have to communicate it during the process to anybody else. And usually it's only after a season, or maybe about 6 months to a year after a collection, where I get to look back at something and make a little bit more sense of it. And it usually kind of gives me a little bit of an insight of where I was and how I felt at that time. And sometimes it just remains confusing.
For our very last visual study, Lucy's actually chosen this book by Collier Shaw, Jens F. And I thought it was quite a good tie-in, particularly as well, because when Coco was looking at the layout for her nude study, Collier was actually very important for her, and the artwork, the art photography of Collier. And for Coco as well, that project we just looked at was very important in terms of establishing her as in her guise as an art photographer, and managing that very difficult and blurry line which many photographers have at the moment when they're working with fashion, because it is something that fashion cannibalizes so many things from the art world, and vice versa as well. But so here we are with this book from Collier. Could you fill us in?
It's maybe a very good point at which to end, because I think this book by Collier Shaw, which was her first book, and a body of work that she made as an artist in 2005, it kind of relates to a lot of the themes we've been talking about. So the first is perhaps this kind of relationship with the past and with history, and a kind of reactive way of working, which Thomas has talked about. So this series of photographs, annotations, collages and drawings is called Jens F. It was the name that Collier gave to, it was the name of, a young man that Collier met on a train in Bavaria, in Germany, where her ancestors are from this part of Germany. So she met him on a train and she invited him to be the centre of a new project, which she based on a body of work by an American painter called Andrew Wyeth, who made these paintings called the Helga paintings. And Andrew Wyeth had met this woman, Helga, who lived in the house next door to him in rural America. And he was married and living with his wife, but he developed a kind of obsession with this woman, Helga, and made a series of paintings of her. And what Collier did for this project was to reposition Jens F. in the role of Helga, and to invert the kind of relationship of male and female that had operated in the Andrew Wyeth Helga paintings. So whereas initially you have a man looking at a woman, you now have a woman looking at a man. So that sense of using something from the past in order to articulate your own position on, for example, subject-object relationships in this case. I think Collier also, for me, is very interesting because she has worked historically as a fine artist kind of since the 90s onwards, and now is very much operating like mainly within fashion photography. And she sees that as the most sensible medium for her to be working in at the moment. And that's something that a view that I share. I'm personally very interested in fashion photography now as a medium, perhaps that's a lot more, has a kind of vitality that maybe photography in a more fine art context doesn't have at all. And yeah, so I know that so Collier, from conversations I've had, and I'm sure others of us have had here, she feels very excited by this medium. Interesting to think about in relation to Jürgen, who's sort of doing something almost in reverse.
With Jürgen, it's funny, sorry, I was just going to interrupt. With Jürgen, I feel it's like, it's a very generational thing. Like, we're talking about everyone's feeling, influenced by certain things that happen, artists, fashion, etc. And it's really a sign of time. I think we keep being bombarded constantly by images. And in a way, I feel like, say, okay, I'm much older than you, but still, like, in a way, we don't really believe so much in producing anything new anymore. When, for example, and it's quite interesting when I work with photographers of my generation, but not necessarily, it's a different method for us to try to produce something that's new or hasn't been done before. For us, what matters is just to document a certain moment that's very personal, and that's kind of the whole point. For example, when I work with Jürgen, he's like, oh my god, this has never been done before. Oh, have you ever seen like a guy with a plate on cover? You know, like, it's like, this is new. So for him, it's quite challenging. You know, for example, all of this young photographers who don't necessarily strive to produce anything new. For him, he finds it almost outrageous. It's like, so it's a very old school, again, a kind of approach to work, to art, to fashion, and photography, in a sense of like something has to be new. But I feel like that's sort of dying away in a way. Like that's, at least in this moment in time, it's not so important to us to produce anything that's purely new.
Yeah, I agree, and I teach young fashion photographers, and one of the main things I kind of try and impress on them is to have a kind of visual literacy that's based on looking at everything they can look at, every single, like not being, being just looking at as many things, as many images produced by as many people over as many different areas as possible, because that's almost one of the most important tools that you have now as a young image maker, I think. And then the only other thing that I would mention in relation to Collier is her particular kind of exploration of gender and identity, sexual identity, which is very nuanced and does not rely necessarily on binary positions, but is much more a kind of fluid exploration of gender, which I feel is one of the most kind of exciting approaches.
How has your experience been working with Collier and Paul?
Collier, I always wanted, I always loved her work, like since really I ain't for a long time. And last time I went to New York in September, something like that. And a girlfriend just messaged me saying that she wanted to take a portrait, so I was like very excited. And yeah, I just showed up to her place, and what ended up to be like just taking 5 minutes, lasted like 4 hours, and we just chatted of everything, etc. Like when she photographs me, it's not nothing is ready. It's like we talk, etc. And sometimes she just has her camera and continue talking, and I continue talking. So it's quite strange sometimes. I'm like, am I supposed to keep my mouth open?
Depends on the situation.
But that's how she does it. Like, for example, we had this ongoing project that she photographs me in my room, like in different vision. Let's put it that way. And each time, yeah, she just comes to my room and we speak. And when we speak, like I don't know, it's good. Yeah, it's like just an interaction, like having a coffee with a friend, but she has a camera instead of eyes.
Nice.
But it's quite, it's just like, it's quite different than the others. But
Yeah, she's very sensitive. Like, it's quite interesting. We shot recently a girl, one of the girls on the front show. It just come out actually yesterday from 03 and it's quite interesting. It's a very personal relationship with, you know, whatever the model represents to her and whatever she wants to see in that moment too. You know, because that's the thing with gender and exploring gender in fashion photography. It's not necessarily, you know, it's kind of an illusion a lot of times. So it's a lot about what they want to see in this person. And yeah, she's very, very sensitive, very discreet, very fragile. So
she told me that when she was like a while ago, she used to take the metro in New York and just like she would see someone cute, she would follow him a bit like cruising, and like just follow her and ask him out when like, you want to come home with me? Yeah, take pictures. It's like a bit like, you know, it's like building this kind of very narrow relationship.
But it's a very fragile, very sensitive relationship because sometimes it's kind of awkward. Like you say, exactly. She doesn't say anything, so there's this person just there in space and you don't know exactly what she wants, but it's kind of, it's very awkward, this like moment in relationship. But I think she really manages to produce beautiful pictures out of that and really get something quite real out of the person, quite on a very sensitive level. I don't know, completely the opposite than what you say.
So if anyone else would like an awkward moment, we'd like to open up the floor to questions. So if anybody would like to ask us a question before we wrap up today, you're absolutely welcome. So any questions at all? Otherwise we'll wrap it up here.
I've talked about everything.
No questions?
You weren't lying when you said that.
See, I told you no questions. All right, well, thank you so much everybody for listening, and we're really excited about the show tonight, and we'll be seeing you then.